internet, and welcome to a rather aggressively opinionated episode of Screen Peeves. Today I wanted to air a few opinions I have regarding Hollywood's ham-fisted handling of some rather sensitive issues, and how it appears everyone is completely incapable of making the right decisions both creatively and ethically when it comes to things like the death of an actor or the accidental slip of a greasy hand. But first, I have merch! Yes, finally, after so many comment asking for merch, I've now pulled my finger out of wherever it presumably was and created the Pizza Earth Society. So fly on over to cynicsnacks.com to get a glimpse of the first ever collection of Cynic Snacks merchandise. Pre-orders are now open for a brief time for anyone who's a fan of my work and wants to help me out by copying themselves some epic limited edition swag. Once this pre-order is closed, these items won't be available ever again, so if you fancy anything, hurry up and give me your money. I do feel somewhat sorry for the Hollywood elite. Times have very much changed with the increasing popularity of bingeable, long-running TV shows and the surge in supply of extended movie franchises. We've reached a point where any truly successful actor is going to have to attach themselves to a long-running project, which is a particularly difficult task for some of them, as it means they need to avoid injury, death, accusation, and conviction for a much longer period of time. Oh, how troubling. And given the lifestyle and behaviours that Hollywood's precious little sprogs typically love to exhibit, this undoubtedly proves to be an ongoing challenge for productions. And unless you're in the highest echelon of the Hollywood elite, who have enough influence and power to simply make things disappear, or you're rich enough to afford the daily transfusions of child's blood necessary to stay youthful, radiant and spry, executives are going to have to develop more attainable methods for their actors and crew to stay safe from calamity until at least the DVD release, to ensure maximum profits. Perhaps all key performers could be secured in their own personal Zorb with an intravenous drip of all the essential proteins, vitamins and minerals they need, being constantly subject to health checkups and banned from spending any one-on-one time with children or their co-stars unattended. We can't ensure well enough against the odds that they might die before a project comes to fruition, or worse, diddle themselves in front of someone without continuous and enthusiastic consent, throwing a giant sweaty spanner in the production's works and potentially losing everyone's precious investment capital. Physical misconduct has become an increasingly prevalent issue in the media in recent years, but that's not actually an indicator that things are all of a sudden getting worse, rather that the Neanderthalic behaviour which has been consistently swept under Hollywood's carpet is now actually being addressed, and unfortunately it would appear that it's been going on unchecked since the dawn of the industry. That was of course until our collective cultural moment of awakening, when Harvey Weinstein obviously did something to upset the chain of command within his conspiratorial circle and was volunteered by them for ritual public sacrifice. He had finally put a face to the long-running Hollywood stereotype of the sleazy movie producer. We'd all heard the stories about casting couches and it's not who you know, it's who you blow. The whole idea was a folktale by this point, but nobody had actually bothered to investigate it properly until now. They'd all just gaze across the faces of Hollywood's successful starlets with an air of contempt. I wonder which gross pig she had to muck to get that role. How was this ever acceptable? And so the tides changed. Everyone dropped their distribution deals with TWC, and so naturally they had to file for bankruptcy. Obviously the name Weinstein is now synonymous with having a deformed willy, and so its stock was essentially worthless. But after a couple of months had passed, and while nobody was looking, Netflix actually acquired streaming rights to a bunch of the Weird Willy Company's films at what I can only assume was an exceptionally low cost, which is a rather bizarre move for a company I'd assumed didn't support Predators. They were very keen to destroy House of Cards just before its finale and distance themselves from Kevin Spacey, who at the time was facing a torrent of accusations by several of his young male co-stars, of which he's now been acquitted, by the way. I'm not saying that he didn't do it, probably did, but, you know, they jumped the gun a little bit. Rather than recasting the role of Frank Underwood and bringing about a natural conclusion to the story, the writers decided to just unceremoniously kill him off screen instead.
And to think it could have been such a memorable send-off.
Turning the final season into a short, cockeyed, virtue-signalling, Scooby-Doo-esque whodunit, which basically made no effort to round off the story they'd been building up to over the course of the previous 5 years.
The reign of the middle-aged white man is over.
A clear-cut demonstration that Netflix wants absolutely nothing to do with anyone accused of foul behaviour, but they're apparently more than happy to finance Harvey's prison activities, as although management of the Weird Willy Company's assets has technically changed hands, his contracts will still have profit participation deals on all the movies he produced, and he still retains a 20% ownership of the entire company, which has now been acquired by Lantern Entertainment and continues to operate. This will certainly provide him with the oomph he needs to rise up the prison ranks from bottom bitch to arthropod boss, and his legacy of presenting his ugly, deformed member to his unsuspecting peers can continue in a more welcoming and suitable environment. Netflix obviously wants to benefit from the appearance of being ethical when it's directly in the spotlight, but have no qualms with scoring some cheap inventory a few moments later when they think nobody's looking. But I see you, Netflix, you fucking shits. And so the landscape surrounding physical misconduct is now rather tumultuous, and dealing with any kind of allegations against stars is consistently handled with the kind of menial belligerence you'd expect from a medieval doctor. Just chop it off and hope for the best. But even in that instance, they could just flee to France, because apparently they don't care at all. They'll just let you carry on making movies. They'll even sometimes still give you awards. But you don't have to be a disgusting kiddie fiddler to cause problems for the industry. No, you could just be an utterly selfish bastard and die suddenly before everyone has finished getting what they need out of you. It used to just be that if an actor would die, we'd simply feel sad, pay our respects and lay them to rest. Whichever project they last worked on would be their swan song, and everyone could celebrate their legacy and enjoy the body of work they produced within their lifetime. Naturally, there are going to be instances where they sadly passed part way through a project, and it's a matter that needs to be handled with a great deal of care. Perhaps if the movie was basically complete, any final missing scenes could be cleverly filmed with a stand-in actor, like when Brandon Lee was accidentally killed with a prop gun during the filming of Every Goth's Wet Dream, The Crow. Or if inventive or creative solutions could be found to adapt the project so it could still be realised, the production could continue down a new, respectful path. Much like how Terry Gilliam rewrote parts of the Imaginarium of Dr. Parnassus so that the story could still be told after the tragic passing of Heath Ledger, who had only filmed a fraction of his scenes in the lead role. Gilliam rewrote the story slightly to have the lead illusory doctor taking on various different visages, so that some of Heath's acting buddies could take on the mantle and help complete his final project. There are clearly respectful, inoffensive ways to handle the unfortunate and untimely demise of an actor. It has been achieved. But since it's become increasingly popular to rely on CGI for basically everything, our crafty visual effects artists have now been tasked with resurrecting the dead. There have been a few instances of a long dead actor's likeness being recreated for a tasteful, minor inclusion into a movie, like Marlon Brando in Superman Returns or Laurence Olivier in whatever the fuck that movie was, but they aren't the worst culprits. They pretty much just amount to brief scenes of obscure floating heads. It's only borderline horrendous. Unlike Rogue One, a Star Wars story which was praised by many critics for its lifelike recreation of Peter Cushing, and I'll admit, during the opening of the scene I was actually impressed, momentarily. Seeing the obscured reflection of Grand Moff Tarkin in the glass was remarkably effective, but they just had to go and fucking ruin it by making him turn around and stand right there, centre screen, lit up in all his uncanny horror. Ugh. They also included a very rigid and shiny rendering of a young Carrie Fisher, whose performance was quite plastic and unemotive, so overall a pretty accurate depiction of the late actress. But I must say it's still a far cry better than the rather unconvincing superimposed 3D mapping of Paul Walker's head edited into action scenes in Furious 7, although I have to admit his final scene in the Fast and or the Furious franchise is very heartfelt. I personally hate those movies, but that one rising shot as Brian and Dom take separate forks in the road, it was a genuinely touching send-off. Especially when you consider they could have just completely fucked it up like Star Wars and just spun around like a whirling dervish in the writer's room attempting to repurpose scraps of old footage from 2 movies ago that they found on the editing room floor, in the vain hope that we'd all just play along and act like it wasn't the most blatantly ineffective dialogue jigsaw ever committed to film.
Never underestimate a droid.
Although I do sympathise with everyone involved, trying to posthumously include Carrie Fisher into the narrative of The Rise of Skywalker was an extremely difficult task, but I still maintain that the third movie should have opened at General Leia's funeral. Hell, fuck that, it should have opened at all of their funerals. Although these examples aren't ideal, I will concede that in some cases they were kind of necessary. You can't just recast a role which has such a long-running deep root in our pop culture, and is so intrinsically connected to the actor who specifically made it so. They're iconic and have a huge fan base who want to celebrate the actor and character's legacy and also get some form of closure after their passing. And so when I read that James Dean had just been cast in the lead role for Finding Jack, a movie set during the Vietnam War scheduled to be released at the end of 2020, I couldn't even begin to rationalise this information. He's been dead for 65 years, but don't let that stop him from securing the lead role in this epic blockbuster. Attempting to justify this entirely vacuous decision, the film's director Anton Ernst said, "We searched high and low for the perfect character to portray the role of Rogan, which has some extreme complex character arcs. And after months of research, we decided on James Dean." Yes, I too am struggling to think of literally any living actor. How could he even believe for a moment that all people are incapable of handling complex character arcs when compared to a lifeless digital effigy? Is James Dean alright with this? When did we all agree that this sort of thing is okay? Do they just include an ownership of soul clause in all actors' contracts? I believe the ground zero for this new wave of thinking that somehow absolved everyone's collective guilt for the absolute bastardization of celebrities' souls occurred at Coachella 2012, which showcased a rare performance from Tupac Shakur. That sounds great. I'd love to see Tupac perform, you say out loud in your room on your own. One problem. Well, he's been dead for 16 years. That's okay. Let's just get a fucking hologram of him to perform instead. So this became the new benchmark. Famous people can't even get shot to death peacefully anymore. No, their obligations now continue beyond the grave, and should they tragically pass before their time or before the studios are done putting them to work, they can just be replaced by an unconvincing, creepy digital likeness of them to act as a horrible shoe-in and continue to farm dollars from the brain-dead, loose-fisted consumer horde as they writhe around on top of each other trying to get their best selfie with Tupac's holographic arse. The extent of these absolutely baffling choices apparently knows no bounds, and poor actors can't even age gracefully anymore. It used to just be that you'd traverse your acting career playing roles roughly suitable for your own age, you'd portray teenagers well into your 30s, then you'd graduate on to spend a few years playing parents or authority figures. Then, once you'd got your silver top, you could spend your golden years phoning it in with lots of ironic cameos. Or if you still actually wanted to put some effort in, you could bash out loads of those old people movies whose sole purpose is to reassure their aged audiences that they'll all definitely be dead soon. Not anymore. No, it's fine. Even if you're 75 and have a very obviously limited range of mobility, we can just artificially iron out the wrinkles on your head and make you look like a rubbery 40-year-old who just happens to be suffering with particularly stiff limbs at the moment, resulting in visual abominations like The Irishman, starring Rubber De Niro, Al Plasticino and Joe Pesci. This looks terrible. It's so distracting and bizarre and triggers that uncanny valley effect in the back of my brain. Just cast younger lookalikes in these roles. If your story spans a number of decades, we used to simply cast actors of varying ages who looked vaguely similar. And if the casting department weren't completely inept, you as the viewer could easily suspend your disbelief enough to accept that this is a younger Robert De Niro. But no more! Be gone this archaic, competent approach to casting movies and offering opportunities to new actors. We can all just sit around and pretend that this doesn't look like deep-fried pus.
What the fuck is this?
Oh, and just in case these visuals didn't trigger your bullshitometer, let's also make De Niro's eyes an unnaturally piercing blue colour, just to make absolutely certain that it looks undeniably fake. You see, there will still be some of you thinking that this looks good, and that's fine. You're allowed to be wrong about things, but you also need to appreciate how your brain interprets computer-generated images and how special effects like this will absolutely not stand the test of time. Graphical fidelity is improving every single day as digital artists are constantly finding new ways to create realistic looking CGI. Every time a fraction of an advancement is made and you bear witness to it with your squishy little view balls, it's as if your brain receives an automatic update and will now perceive any previous iteration of realistic looking graphics as polygonal sludge. I remember as a child being in awe the first time I saw The Getaway on PS2. The team behind it had gone to extraordinary lengths to create a playable version of London's gritty streets as accurately as possible. I could not believe my eyes. I even shouted for my dad to come into the room so he too could bear witness to this incredible aesthetic achievement. "Oh my god," he uttered in disbelief as we both gawped, transfixed on the screen. "It looks like real life," I said. "I don't know how they're ever going to make games look better than this," my dad replied. "It looks like real life. I don't know how they're ever going to make games look better than this." But this is why I have absolutely no time for movies that are just soulless visual spectacle. I was baffled by the swathes of people all maniacally rushing into theatres to watch Avatar because it's going to be the movie of the century, when really no effort was made at all to tell a good story or say anything poignant or worthwhile, but it was just a visual piece of junk food, a cheeseburger for your eyes. Quickly shove it in and shit it out and forget that it ever happened. And that's why years later nobody can even name a single fucking character from that movie.
Name one character from Avatar. Jesus Christ.
Will that stop the swathes of clueless twats from forking out their hard-earned cash to go and see the other 4 Avatar movies that James Cameron has lined up? Nope. The next of which is now scheduled for a 2021 release. It's only taken him 12 fucking years to make. I wonder how long he spent writing the dialogue or considering character development. Most likely about 12 minutes. But at this current rate of production, the final instalment of his graphical demonstration movie series won't be finished until 2057, when James Cameron should be the tender age of 102 years old. He'll likely be dead by then, which is a shame, but that's okay. We can just get a hologram of James Cameron to fill in and complete the project for him. And maybe this will finally prove for once that a digital replacement will improve the quality of a product, if the end of the Avatar franchise is directed by a brainless cloud of air lit up to look like a man. Subscribe to my fucking channel. Thanks.